I'll go ahead and get started then officially. So thank you for joining us this afternoon for our 29th session of the Journey Down the Clackamas. As Clark aptly pointed out, it's been an amazing 1+ years of bi-weekly conferences. These have been simply awesome in my opinion. They've been really helpful. And so I'm Dave Bugney, a board member of the Clackamas River Basin Council. And joining me today is Cheryl McGinnis, the CRBC Executive Director, who will be assisting me with the technical aspects of this. And before we get into our program, I'd like to cover a few items. So since its founding 26 years ago, the CRBC has worked as a non-governmental group of stakeholders to protect and improve the Clackamas River Basin and its tributaries. Their mission is to foster partnerships for clean water and to improve fish and wildlife habitat and the quality of life for all those who live, work, and recreate in the Clackamas River watershed. On behalf of the Basin Council, I'd like to thank our two gold sponsors, the Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative and the Clackamas Water Environment Services. And we'd also like to thank our bronze sponsors, the Clackamas River Water Providers, the Geological Society of the Oregon Country, Port Blakely, and Metro. And thanks to also the many individuals who have donated to support this conference. And we continue to seek additional donations, which are tax deductible. And the Clackamas River Basin has been occupied by Native peoples for millennia. It was originally the territory of the Clackamas, Chinook, Molalla, Kalapuya, and other peoples. And is currently recognized as lands of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs, and belongs to other Native peoples who may not be federally recognized. So we thank those who came before us for their stewardship of these lands and waters, and those who continue to steward them now and in the future. So we're gathered for this journey down the Clackamas to learn in-depth information about the basin and its connections to Oregon as a whole, to connect with each other so that we can support our mutual efforts to protect and improve the Clackamas River and its tributaries, and to have some educational fun. Well, the CRBC is partnering with the Environmental Learning Center at Clackamas Community College Workshop, Clackamas Community College, and the workshop attendees will receive a signed certificate of completion for each session. If you'd like a certificate of completion, please add your contact information to our Journey Down the Clackamas Conference Networking Google Sheet and indicate you'd like a certificate in the G column, and we'll forward your contact information to Clackamas Community College. So I'd like to share a few ground rules before I introduce our special guest for today. So please keep your microphones on mute unless invited to participate. And you can keep your cameras off if you like. That also helps us to save bandwidth for our presenter and generally reduces the carbon footprint of our meeting. So we'll have one presenter this afternoon with a brief Q&A after the presentation. So please type your questions in the chat and we will select questions from there. However, if your question is long and or complex, please feel free to ask it in the audio by first raising your hand using that little fancy raise your hand feature. Please feel free to send direct chats to your friends, as I mentioned, if you see them in the participants list. So now we'll start our presentation for this evening. Remember to type your questions in chat, keep yourself muted, and we'll answer questions at the end of the presentation. The webinar will extend until about 3:15 p.m. with questions afterwards. And our presenter this afternoon is Mr. John Runyon. He's principal with Cascade Environmental Group. And John is responsible for overseeing watershed assessment, planning, and habitat restoration projects. He has more than 30 years of experience in natural resource assessment, management, inventory, monitoring, and policy. John specializes in the design and implementation of watershed and habitat assessments, monitoring studies, and aquatic habitat restoration and mitigation project planning and design. So now let's welcome John as he presents about large-scale restoration plans within the Clackamas River Basin. So take it away, John.
Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate it. Let me share the screen here. There we go. So as David said, I'm John Runyon, principal with Cascade Environmental Group. One point in my career, way back longer than I like to admit, I was actually staff for Watershed Council. I was executive director for the McKinsey Watershed Council in the southern part of the Willamette Basin. And ever since then, I have to say I've devoted a big portion of my consulting career on helping watershed councils. That's really where my passion is working with watershed councils and other folks that are engaged in, community restoration actions. What I'm going to talk about today is the Clackamas Partnership's strategic plan. And what I want to do is give you the big picture for the plan and talk about one of the key components of it, and that's the OWEB Focused Investment Partnership, where there's a lot of energy being devoted right now, a lot of money being devoted to restoration under the framework of the Focused Investment Partnership, or if you like acronyms, the FIP. Dave, one correction to what David said about questions is I have questions slides sort of scattered throughout my talk, so we'll have chances to answer your questions from the chat, or you can raise your hand at kind of key points along the way with the talk. So it's not just at the end, we'll also have an opportunity at the end for questions. Let's see, why isn't it moving? Not sure why that's not.
I was the same, John. I had to click right in the middle of the slide.
Okay. Huh. There we go. Sorry about that. So what I'm going to talk about is strategic plan. So I'm a consultant and I specialize in producing big fat documents. And I have to say the strategic plan is a big document. And it's like what Mark Twain said to a friend, I would have written you a shorter letter had I had time. And what my attempt to do today is to provide you with a reader's guide to the strategic plan. So the strategic plan is very broad, and it encompasses the entire Clackamas Basin as well as some adjoining basins, which I'll talk about. So what I'm going to talk about today is an overview of the strategic plan. I'm going to talk about the broad focus. I'm going to talk about a subset of the plan that is really the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board FIP emphasis, and I'll describe what that is. I'll talk about partner roles and the kind of partnerships that the Focused Investment Partnership engenders, but also more broadly partnerships within the Clackamas River Basin. Within the FIP strategy, which I'll really drill into, I'll talk about the geographic focus of it, the native fish population emphasis, restoration priorities and types, Clackamas Project Tracker, which is a web-based tool that we have for planning and tracking projects, and then our project approval process. And then last but not least, I want to talk about cold water and climate change. I see climate change as an existential threat to fish populations and watersheds everywhere, and certainly a threat within the Clackamas, and something that I want to highlight. So what's the mission of the Clackamas Partnership as expressed in the strategic plan? So the partnership really is about collaboration. So the Clackamas Partnership collaborates on coordinated aquatic riparian floodplain restoration, conservation, and habitat protection actions to enhance watershed health, support the recovery and sustainability of native fish populations, and contribute to the region's economic and social vitality. So it's really three really broad areas: watershed health, recovery of native fish, and contributing to the region's economic and social vitality, which includes, quite frankly, events like this. This webinar is contributing to the social vitality, the knowledge of the broader community. So who are the partners for the Clackamas Focused Investment Partnership? So it's over a dozen folks, a dozen organizations who are involved. At the core of it is 4 watershed councils. Obviously, the Clackamas, I'm sorry, 5 watershed councils. I'm sorry, 4 watershed councils: Clackamas River Basin Council, I've got a mistake on here, the Greater Oregon City Watershed Council, the Johnson Creek Watershed Council, and the North Clackamas Urban Watershed Council. So those are the 4 councils that are involved. So you've got the Clackamas River Basin, then you have the adjoining watersheds that include the Greater Oregon City, which is Abernathy Creek, North Clackamas Urban Watersheds Council, which is Rynearson Creek, Kellogg, Boardman Creek, that area. And then, of course, the Johnson Creek Watershed Council, which is Johnson Creek. And I'll show you that when the locations of those areas. If you're not familiar with it, we have maps. It also includes other partners that are involved in the effort: Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District, Metro, Mount Hood National Forest, Clackamas Ranger District, North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, Oregon Parks and Recreation, Clackamas County Water Environment Services, Clackamas Water Providers, Portland General Electric, and Clackamas County. So as you can see, this is a comprehensive list of partners that include the watershed councils, local, county, and federal organizations, as well as Clackamas River Water Providers, Portland General Electric. So pretty impressive group of folks who really came together to try to work efficiently and to work together to accelerate the pace and the effectiveness of restoration projects. Really, by working together, you can accelerate that pace and you can make restoration projects overall more effective. And increasingly, as I see it, I work all over the state, it's really about partnerships. That's what gets things done in complex watersheds where you've got overlapping jurisdictions, you've got various ownership patterns. It takes partnerships to get things done. So the core implementing partners are the watershed councils, the 4 watershed councils, the Conservation District, and Metro. And what do I mean by core implementing partners? These are the primary entities that are getting things done on the ground in terms of implementing restoration. The other organizations, whether it's the Department of Environmental Quality, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Forest Service, and others, they're really helping with catalyzing those projects, helping with the technical aspects behind them. And as you'll see, the broad sort of planning process that we have in place that goes from concept all the way to on the ground actions. And it really takes a broad partnership to get that done. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there are other partnerships in the Clackamas. And in fact, I think, as one who's worked with watershed councils and other organizations around the state, this, quite frankly, is the densest web of partnerships that I've seen. So I'm going to talk today about the Focused Investment Partnership, but there are other partnerships in the Clackamas River Basin that really contribute to a greater understanding of the basin and what needs to be done out there, but also in terms of implementing activities across the basin. So you have the Clackamas Stewardship Partners, Clackamas River Invasive Species Partnership, the Clackamas County Water Education Team, Down the River Cleanup, and with We Love Clean Rivers, Eagle Creek Community Forest, Pesticide Stewardship Partnership, and Shade Our Streams. And these partnerships work either broadly within the basin or in specific areas, and they're focused both on the-ground actions and broader sort of community engagement and collaboration and education. These other partnerships really help enhance and support the FIP just because of the nature of the relationships that have been developed are often overlapping. Many of the same people that are part of the Clackamas Stewardship Partners are also part of the FIP, for example. So as I said, this dense network and web of partnerships really puts the Clackamas River Basin in an incredible position for leveraging resources, collaborating broadly, and getting things done. So the Clackamas Partnerships restoration actions concentrate on a number of things. Restoring watershed processes that are limiting healthy native fish populations. In addition, the restorations actions work on a number of other components, including habitat protection, community outreach to promote water quality, best management practices, BMPs, and conservation activities. And all of these are designed to improve broadly watershed health. So that's the strategic plan overall. A subset of the strategic plan is the Focused Investment Partnership, which I'll talk about in more detail. One of the key parts of working in the Clackamas is the contributions that PGE has made to fish passage in the basin, both getting adults into the upper basin where they can spawn and juveniles coming down from the upper basin into the lower basin where they can rear and migrate as they move out to the ocean. This photo on the lower portion of the slide is the fish collector facility that PG has. And this pulls in the juveniles, collects them so they can then be transported downstream. And PGE has had tremendous success at improving the efficacy and essentially the survival of both adults coming into the upper basin and juveniles moving down into the lower basin. And really the focus of the FIP is on those juveniles that are coming out of the upper basin that have that high survival that PGE has enabled, now providing high quality habitat for them as they rear and migrate down the system. So the strategic plan, as I said, is broader than the FIP, and it focuses on all of these components that I have displayed on this slide. And the FIP is just a portion of that. So the FIP is habitat restoration, landowner stakeholder outreach, monitoring and evaluation. The strategic plan is even more broad than that, and it includes elements in there for habitat protection, promoting best management practices. So that then encompasses the entire strategic plan. The FIP is just focused on habitat restoration and then monitoring and evaluation around those particular projects. All of that is supported by the partnership's capacity. So that includes the Clackamas Project Tracker, coordinated planning, coordinated implementation, coordinated fundraising, and reporting. So the circles are the OWEB FIP focus. So as part of this, we look at the strategic plan and then the OWEB FIP. And there's an overlap there with partnership organizations and Project Tracker and the overall kind of infrastructure we've got. But there's differences in the approach. Strategic plan is whole watershed, emphasis on habitat and processes, restoration and protection. The FIP is a focused geography within the broader Clackamas Basin and including Johnson Creek and Kellogg Creek. Its emphasis is on limiting factors for native fish, so addressing those limiting factors that are constraining native fish, and restoring complexity and access into the systems. And its emphasis, again, is really on restoration, not so much habitat protection as, you know, acquiring properties, putting conservation easements on properties, that sort of thing. That's not the focus of the FIP. I should say that when I was hired as a contractor to come on to develop the strategic plan, the intent was to develop a strategic plan that we could then use as a proposal to the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, OWEB, for the Focused Investment Partnership. And the Focused Investment Partnership is an effort by OWEB to focus on various issues around the state, both upland habitat and native fish populations, and really empowering local partnerships to get things done. And the approach that they use is you apply for funding, and in this case, the Clackamas Partnership was successful, and they received about $8.7 million in funding to support the Focused Investment Partnership over 3 state biennia, so over 6 years essentially, which will end, I believe, in 2026 is the end of the Focused Investment Partnership. So we've already gone through a couple of biennia. We're starting to move along here with the FIP. But the OWEB money is great because it gives us consistency over time in the level of funding. We know that's there. It gives us a leverage point, gives the partnership leverage point for pulling in additional funding, and it gives continuity of planning overall within the strategic plan to know that this is what you're going to accomplish over that period. The strategic plan in itself will continue after that Focused Investment Partnership period more broadly and it will evolve, I'm sure, over time as the watershed is confronting issues around climate change, development, et cetera. It's an adaptive plan that over time can change as issues change. So what's the geographic focus? So basically with the geographic focus of the strategic plan, it's the whole basin and the adjoining watersheds, Abernathy Creek, North Clackamas Urban Watershed Council's tributaries, Kellogg primarily, and Johnson Creek, and the entire Clackamas Basin from headwaters to the Willamette River. All of this is in support of Clackamas fish populations, which I'll talk about more, but Clackamas fish populations, as we've defined it here, are salmon, steelhead, lamprey, and native fish, native resident fish. So here's the listing of the fish that we're calling the Clackamas fish populations. And some of these are have an overarching recovery plan for them, and some of them do not. So bull trout, which have been reintroduced to the system, historically they were present and they were extirpated, so they've been reintroduced. Fall chinook, chum salmon, Pacific lamprey, steelhead, coho, and spring chinook. So those are our focal populations. We also include resident cutthroat trout in the listing of populations that will benefit from actions that are directed specifically at these core populations or core fish species. Any questions at this point? I've given you kind of a broad overview of both the FIP and the strategic plan more broadly. David, any questions?
I'm not seeing any, so I think you can just keep
Okay,
rolling.
we'll keep rolling. I just want to give folks a chance here. So what's the geographic focus for the Focus Investment Partnership? Again, this is the effort that's being funded by OWEB. It includes the Clackamas River. There are 3 reaches, starting at the top, the upper, there's a middle, which is primarily U.S. Forest Service land. And then there's a lower, which is below the PGE infrastructure, which is the lower river all the way to the Willamette. And that's primarily private ownership, Metro, Oregon Parks and Recreation District, et cetera. It does include one reach of the Willamette River, and that reach of the Willamette River is defined on its southern portion from Willamette Falls to its northern portion, which is to the confluence of Johnson Creek. So, and it's on the west bank of the Willamette River. So there are and have been restoration projects implemented along that area at the confluence of the Clackamas, for example. The Clackamas River Basin Council has a project there. And currently the partners are looking at other projects that would be along that Willamette River reach. That's an important part of this, important aspect of it. It also includes significantly the lower Clackamas River tributaries, Clear, Deep, et cetera. Though Eagle Creek would be another one. Those are included in there. And then, as I said, it includes the major Willamette River tributaries, Johnson Creek, Kellogg Creek, Abernathy Creek, and other small tributaries. This is really important in terms of the geographic context because all of these basins kind of working together support the Clackamas populations. So you think about coho, the Clackamas population of coho historically used the Clackamas River Basin as sort of its core population area for spawning and rearing, but also had, you know, spatial diversity that included populations in Abernathy Creek, in Kellogg Creek, and Johnson Creek. And those were key too, providing sort of spatial diversity to the whole population over time, and really kind of setting it up so that if one area is not performing as well as the other, for reasons of, you know, something catastrophic happens, like a fire, which we recently had, you've got that diversity of other tributaries out there that contribute to the Clackamas population. And this population is all captured within the Lower Columbia River recovery strategy that was developed by the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, similar recovery strategy from the NOAA Fisheries, focused on these populations. So it's really a key area for recovery in the context of the Lower Columbia River environmental significant unit for fish populations. So what's the restoration emphasis for the strategic plan? And again, this is more broad than just the FIP, and it's important to understand that. This is Kellogg Dam here, which is obviously a significant fish passage barrier. And currently, North Clackamas Watersheds Council is working on a strategy to remove that dam. It's complex because it also includes Highway 99E, which is actually kind of integral to the dam. So it will also include replacement of that bridge, which was built in the 30s. And so that's a broader emphasis of the strategic plan is fish passage. The Focused Investment Partnership is just focused on fish passage in Johnson Creek and not more broadly. And that's just kind of the way the planning process worked. But that's not to say that the strategic plan is not focused more broadly on other fish passage issues. It includes habitat restoration and protection, which is important, habitat connectivity, which is here disrupted by a dam, and water quality. So that's broader than just the focus on the fish populations. So as I said, the emphasis is on native fish. It's an OWEB priority, aquatic habitat for native fish species. And we're a key core area. The Clackamas River Basin is a key core area for emphasis on native fish. And so that's the proposal that we submitted to OWEB, was an emphasis on native fish. They have other focused investment partnerships around the state that are also focused on native fish. A good example of that is the John Day Focused Investment Partnership. They're focused on their native fish populations. But there are also focused investment partnerships that are focused more on upland habitat. There's one down in the Ashland area that's focused on upland forests, and as part of that is thinning forests for habitat improvement, but also to minimize fire hazard for the communities in those areas. So there's both kinds of focuses. There's also sage grouse focus, which is more upland habitat on the east side. So here we are with the Clackamas there. And the Clackamas population is listed as one of the highest priority among the populations around the state. So we have a high priority population based on OWEB's assessment. So what are the restoration activities for the Focused Investment Partnership? Really, it's focused on, as I said, providing habitat for those juvenile fish that are coming out of the upper basin, as well as habitat in the upper basin. As I said, there is a geographic focus on the main stem of the Clackamas above PGE complex. So the primary emphasis is on rearing and migratory habitat complexity and access, addressing key Lower Columbia River Plan, ESA plan, habitat complexity metrics for recovery. So these are habitat complexity metrics that revolve around large wood, side channel increases, and potentially large wood placed in those side channels. So access into side channels and improving side channels, riparian planting, but we include riparian planting only if they're part of a complexity project for the FIP focus. So only if associated, for example, with large wood placed in an alcove or a side channel, then we include riparian planting around that. So that's really key to the types of project. The emphasis on Clackamas River migratory and rearing habitat, which would benefit the Clackamas River populations, but also the Willamette River projects also benefit upper Willamette River runs. So Willamette River projects that are at the confluence of the Clackamas, for example, or the other tributaries or along the Willamette River will benefit, for example, juvenile Chinook that have come down from the McKenzie into the lower basin and will rear in the lower Willamette as they move to the ocean. So it benefits more than just the Clackamas population. It benefits all those populations, particularly steelhead and spring Chinook in the upper basin. And that's important to understand. So we have broader effects than just local. Abernathy, Kellogg, and Johnson Creek watersheds also contribute to population recovery, in particular spatial diversity. We want to have a diversity of habitats out there as you're thinking about hedging your bets with things that can happen, such as climate change. So the restoration activities around the overall strategic plan, as distinct from the FIP, is recover watershed processes and connectivity. So looking at more broadly, how do you improve processes? How do you improve connectivity within the aquatic corridor, for example? Examples include improving road drainage, repairing enhancement, addressing fish passage barriers, and promoting BMPs. So this is beyond the FIP. These are activities in the strategic plan that work synergistically, with the FIP to restore watershed processes. Certainly things like road erosion are really important to address when you're thinking about, for example, spawning habitat, that sort of thing. But those aren't the kinds of actions that we're directly engaged in with the FIP process or that are funded by OWEB for the FIP. Those are projects that are outside of that funding that the Basin Council, the Forest Service, and other partners will take on. And promoting BMPs is one that is often an educational activity that goes on with landowners. For example, the Soil and Water Conservation District working with rural residential and agricultural landowners to reduce erosion from rural roads on their property, if they have livestock, addressing those kinds of things. So all of these are other activities that are occurring within the Clackamas River Basin. So the FIP addresses the primary limiting factor for Lower Columbia salmon populations, and that's habitat complexity and access to off-channel habitat. So habitat complexity, and you think about large wood in the stream, creating pools and hiding cover and really dense habitat areas where juveniles can rear and feed, areas where adult salmon, as they're moving upstream to spawn, can hide and have cover. That's the emphasis of the Focus Investment Partnership. It's on habitat complexity and access to those off-channel habitats that are so key for the recovery of the Lower Columbia River salmon and steelhead runs, and in particular the Clackamas population. And as I said, we have a small component of the FIP that's focused on fish passage barriers linking cold water habitat in Johnson Creek. The Johnson Creek Watershed Council has done a fantastic job identifying where they have cold water tributaries that could offer cold water refugia for fish that are trying to get out of the main stem of Johnson Creek, which in areas can be pretty warm, for example, in the summer, let's say in August, and they can move into these smaller, let's say spring-fed, often spring-fed tributaries that are much, much cooler, and they can rear there, have much less stress and increase their survival because they have access to those cold water tributaries. So that is one component of the FIP, is addressing those fish passage barriers in Johnson Creek. So restoration activities, as I said, rearing and migratory habitat complexity and access address the key habitat complexity metrics for recovery. So the Lower Columbia Recovery Plan includes metrics for large wood placement. How much are you going to place out there? What does it really take to recover fish populations? It has metrics in there for how much side channel you need to increase to support the population. Riparian planting, if only part of a complexity project, they have metrics and goals around that. Off-channel wetland complex increases, that is connectivity into the floodplain, that during certain river stages, when there's overbank flooding into that floodplain, fish can rear and feed. So that's also included. So as a result, they've developed goals for each of those metrics. So you have delisting goals for large wood placement, for side channel increase, riparian planting, off-channel wetland complex increases, et cetera. And this is from 2016. And you can see here, back in 2016, when we were developing the strategic plan, what the accomplishments were at that time. And since then, since we've received the OWEB FIP grant and started to implement projects, all of these metrics are moving along and increasingly working towards that goal. And the idea is by the end of the FIP to be pretty close to achieving the delisting goals for the Clackamas fish populations. You'll note that riparian planting was pretty close to the delisting goal in 2016. And that's thanks to the Shade Our Streams effort. Just tremendous effort there. And again, a separate partnership that really contributed to meeting this metric. And it's really significant. And this is continuing to accumulate. So certainly with riparian planting, that's going to exceed the delisting goal, as will many of these other metrics. So as I said, it's an ESA anatomous salmonid focus. It's really contributing to the Lower Columbia Recovery Plan. So these are the metrics in 2018, and you can see considerable progress on those. And already by 2018, riparian planting had increased to almost 151% of the delisting goal. So incredible progress there, incredible progress with wetland complex increases too. So one of the other fish populations that is recognized in the plan that isn't included in the Lower Columbia Recovery Plan, which has an ESA focus, Endangered Species Act focus, is Pacific lamprey. And Pacific lamprey are obviously a key fish species in all of the watersheds within the Willamette Basin and indeed in the Columbia River Basin. There's been dramatic declines in lamprey populations, but one of the relative strongholds is the Willamette Basin. The Willamette Basin has some of the healthiest lamprey populations, but still in peril. And this map here shows the relative rank of the broader basins within the Willamette. And as you can see, whether it's the Molalla Pudding or the South Santiam, those are pretty imperiled populations. When you look at the Clackamas, it is vulnerable, but much less imperiled. And so it is a stronghold for lamprey species in the lower Willamette. And that includes Abernathy Creek, which gets a significant influx of spawning lamprey. And remember, these are all below Willamette Falls, and Johnson Creek, which also gets a significant component of lamprey into it. All of those are really important populations, and they interact with each other. And so lamprey are a significant species for the Focus Investment Partnership and for the strategy overall. As I said, all the other Willamette Basin basins are really assessed to be critically imperiled or imperiled. While the Clackamas population is not at a super high level of health, it's certainly healthier than the other ones, and in fact healthier than most basins in the Columbia River Basin. So really, really an important area for recovery of lamprey populations, for recovery and sustaining lamprey populations. As I said, bull trout are part of the plan. It isn't really a big focus of the FIP, but it is part of the strategic plan. And what was once an experimental population, it's a recovery population that's been introduced to the upper basin because they were essentially extinct from the upper basin. They were extirpated from them. And so they've been moved into, from the Metolius population, they've translocated adults into the upper basin in habitats that they really thrive in. And those are cold water habitats that are spring fed. And one good example of that is Pinhead Creek, where there's a pretty good population of bull trout. And so the Forest Service, along with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, manage projects around that. And they've done some significant things in terms of access into these cold water tributaries that really benefit bull trout. And currently it has a pretty healthy population that is sustaining itself, and in fact, they think growing. So one of the central features in terms of the coordination around the Focus Investment Partnership and getting projects on the ground is Clackamas Project Tracker. And if you Google Clackamas Project Tracker, it will pop up for you. And there you have an opportunity to look at the array of projects that we're implementing across the basin, as well as projects that are being proposed for ultimate either focused investment partnership funding or perhaps leveraging other funding pots for that. And it's an incredible planning tool and tracking tool because it's web-based, and it's a point where everyone can come in, work on updating the status of their project or putting in a proposal, for example, for a project. And then it provides a lot of transparency, both for all the partnership, but for other folks that are interested in what the partnership is doing. So you can follow projects all the way through their lifespan, from proposals through project prioritization, and we have a detailed prioritization process, design, permitting, construction, and post-project grant reports. So it tracks the projects by focal species, it talks about limiting factors, and it gives us a way at the end to track those metrics that I was talking about before, large wood, for example, side channel habitat increases. Unless you've got an accounting tool like this, boy, you're in a world of hurt, because when you've got a big complex partnership like this and multiple actions going on, you really want to account for your activities. And I mean, that's what you look for is showing effectiveness of projects. OWEB requires that kind of reporting. And so it's a really great tool for that. And it's subsequently been adopted by the John Day Focused Investment Partnership. We were the first one out there to kind of lead the way with this kind of application. Has a geographic template. There are 39 watersheds, which are smaller watersheds that comprise the Clackamas River Basin and the other areas. So we have 39 watersheds, and that's kind of our core way of tracking things. As I said before, 3 Clackamas River reaches and 1 Willamette River reach. We go through a review process each biennia where we look at the strategic plan, we prioritize projects, we go through an internal process, and then we have a group that technical review team that looks at those projects with OWEB and provides advice. So in the end, we come out with a much better project after this prioritization and review process. It really strengthens projects because we sort of have this peer review process in place where very experienced restoration practitioners can look at other organizations' projects and help provide advice and collaboration. So it's really not about competition, it's about collaboration and helping each other improve projects. These are the performance metrics that can come out of Project Tracker. They're tracked for every individual project. So it's more than just large wood, it's off-channel habitats. We also have other things that are beyond the FIP that are just part of the strategic plan, like road decommissioning, et cetera. This is an example of a project fact sheet that came out of Project Tracker, and this is looking at upstream fish passage in Johnson Creek, which I mentioned. Fish passage is really key. So you get these nice little reports that come out of it that are great for conveying what's going on and communicating. Another example here of a project, which is a Clackamas River Basin Council one. It includes photos and everything with it. It includes in the program an incredible mapping feature where you can look at proposed projects that are in design and implemented. So it's a way to get a really great sort of spatial view of where the projects are arrayed across the Clackamas River Basin and the other watersheds. So with that, any questions at this point? No, I'm running a little behind here.
There was a question regarding BMPs, basically what that is. That BMP question was answered, but perhaps you'd like to elaborate on.
Sure, BMPs.
Identify.
Yeah, BMPs, I'm sorry, I probably used the acronym alone. BMPs are best management practices. And there are a group of best management practices that have been developed for things like controlling stormwater off of urban streets and how to control that and treat it. There are best management practices for controlling erosion off of croplands, for example. There are best management practices for controlling erosion off of dirt and gravel roads in urban areas, those kinds of things. So there's sets of BMPs that look at different land uses and different management practices and are there to help minimize and mitigate for potential impacts in streams, et cetera. So now I want to talk about climate change because I think it's the existential threat for the Clackamas River fish populations, as well as other fish populations throughout the globe. Unless we address this and try to work on adaptive strategies that can help mitigate for climate change, we're really going to have a tough time sustaining these populations. And so the approach that is embodied in the strategic plan is obviously focused on the stream water component of climate change. And so really looking at ameliorating stream flow and temperature changes that are projected to occur in the Clackamas River Basin, where you're going to have increased summer high temperatures, for example, periods like we've had in the last couple of years where we have sustained periods of extreme high temperatures, which increases water temperatures, and decreased snowpack, which decreases stream flows. So really trying to build in resilience to climate change by restoring, in this case, side channel and floodplain connectivity. That can provide areas where fish can seek out cooler habitat. Stream flow regimes. By improving stream flow, and you can ameliorate temperatures. Improving riparian shade, which can really ameliorate temperatures. Grading incised channels can often improve stream temperatures because you can then connect it with groundwater and hyporheic flows. And as I said, the Johnson Creek Watershed Council is doing, is addressing fish passage barriers that provide access into cold water areas. So those are all examples. And just one example of this is summer 2005 average stream temperatures for Parsons North Logan side channel in lower Clackamas. And you can see the yellow line on the top is the Clackamas River temperature, and the line on the bottom, the blue line, is the temperature within the side channel, which interacts with groundwater. And it's up to 4 degrees difference, more than 4 degrees difference between the two, 4 degrees C, which is really significant for fish as they're trying to escape the warmer waters and go and rear and hold in those areas. And so that's a key component of the Focused Investment Partnership, is trying to reconnect side channels that are disconnected from the river from a variety of issues. This was a study that was done by DEQ in the lower Willamette River, where they looked at cold water refugia. And essentially they looked at the contribution of major tributaries, including the Clackamas, to cold water. And they defined cold water refugia as areas where there's at least a 2 degrees C temperature reduction from the main stem. So 2 degrees differential between the two systems. High quality cold water refuge will have at least a 2 degrees C temperature reduction, and the maximum temperature range is within the optimum temperatures for salmon and steelhead rearing and migration, which is 18 C or about 64 degrees Fahrenheit. That's optimal for salmon and steelhead for rearing and migration. So this study then looked at the tributaries coming into the Willamette River, and Johnson Creek delivers surprisingly cold water to the Willamette River that's significantly colder than the river itself, and provides areas where both adult salmon that are moving up the river can sneak into Johnson Creek's lower channel and hide out during high temperature periods, and juveniles too will experience the cooler temperatures there and will often move into it. The Clackamas River provides really significant cold water refugia because it's about 10% of the Willamette River's flow. So it's a significant volume of water that interacts with the Willamette, and it contributes this cold water plume, not just at the confluence, but it extends downstream at least a quarter mile on the east bank of the Willamette. And there it provides refugia both for adult salmon that are coming up, as well as juveniles. And there have been periods where there's been extreme warm water in the Willamette, in the Willamette, warm water there, where adult salmon that are migrating up into the upper Willamette will pull into the Clackamas River to kind of de-stress and cool down and hold there while the Willamette River is too warm. So it's really important for sustaining populations to have these cold water refugia during particularly periods of high temperature in the Willamette. And this is just one example of how we can help mitigate for climate change. And it really illustrates how important the Clackamas River is, not just for Clackamas River fish populations, but also for those upper basin populations. So with that, I conclude my talk and give you the final takeaways here. So basically, the Focus Investment Partnership and the other Clackamas strategic partnerships accelerate the pace and effectiveness of restoration. That's what they're there for. And they really complement the web of other partnerships that are going on in the Clackamas River Basin and indeed in the other watersheds. To meet current and new challenges, strategic restoration partnerships and actions will continue into the future. So this plan really is a plan that can be adapted and changed over time, but partnerships on into the future will be there to meet new and emerging challenges in the Clackamas River Basin. And it's going to be important to build on the successes of this current plan and adapt to future issues. The actions embodied in the FIP and the other activities that the Watershed Council and all of its partners are doing effectively mitigates for climate change. And mitigating for climate change is going to be essential to the recovery of Clackamas fish populations, as well as recovery of the upper Willamette populations, which the Clackamas definitely contributes to. So with that, thank you. Any questions?
Excellent, John. Thanks. If folks have any further questions for John, feel free to type them in the chat or raise your hand and answer and speak into the microphone. I'm not seeing any.
Wow, I must have
You just
covered it all, I guess, or they're all just poured out of their brains. And
oh no. This was excellent because it gives everybody an overview of what's happening in our basin. I think it was a marvelous presentation. So hopefully, folks, when you leave today, you'll get a better understanding of how much interest there is in the Clackamas by a variety of organizations and all that's being done and what has left to be done. And like John said, the partnerships for the future after the FIP expires. So with that, before folks leave, if you would just hang on for a little bit more, just upcoming announcements. Our next session will be on May 3rd at 6 p.m. So not at 2 p.m., but this will be at 6 p.m. and more for the general audience. And we'll continue our series focusing on water and fish. And we'll focus on the economics of fish habitat restoration projects and how effective they have been based upon observations of the fish counts at particular sites. And you can use the same Zoom link and if you're already registered for the event, and we'll send you a reminder, a day or two before. And then we'll also send you a thank you email with these links, as well as the link to the recording for more information, and as well as getting continuing education units from Clackamas Community College. So once again, John, thank you very much for taking the time to do this. It was very informative. And we also thank our gold sponsors, Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative and Clackamas Water Environment Services, and our bronze sponsors, the Clackamas River Water Providers, Metro, Port Blakely, and the Geological Society of the Oregon Country, who are helping us keep this conference free for all participants with their support. And thank you for joining us this afternoon. And please let us know what you thought of today's program. And we'll see you 2 Tuesdays from now on May 3rd at 6 p.m. So again, thank you, everybody.
I see that there's a comment from Robin D. about Project Tracker. Robin, would you like to comment?
I just thought that was a great way to share information among all those different groups, and really a nice tool where you can zoom in and see what's going on. So thanks for sharing that. Glad it's easy to find if you search for it too.
Yeah, and I recommend you go look at it. It's a really an incredible resource.
Yeah.
Okay, any further questions for John? Okay, great. Again, great